Welcome to Nothing But the Truth. I'm your host, Trudy Stern. On this program, we have spent a great deal of time examining the war being waged against Israel and the Western world. When most people think of war, they think of tanks, missiles, terrorists, soldiers on a battlefield. But modern warfare looks very different. Today, some of the most powerful weapons are not military at all. We've discussed cyber attacks that can cripple infrastructure without a single shot being fired. We've discussed the coordinated protest movements and encampments that have spread across college campuses and cities throughout America and Europe, sowing division, hate, hostility, and unrest. We've discussed foreign influence campaigns designed to weaken confidence in democratic institutions and turn citizens against one another. In short, the battlefields have expanded. And tonight, we're going to examine another powerful weapon in that arsenal, the information space, narrative warfare. And we have with us an expert in that field. Joel Finkelstein is the co-founder and chief science officer of the Network Contagion Research Institute, known as NCRI. A neuroscientist by training, Joel's research led him to study how hate, extremism, and disinformation spread through online networks as well as other places. His work has shown that spikes in online hate speech often precedes acts of violence and social unrest in the real world. Since founding NCRI, Joel and his team have become leaders in the study of online radicalization, anti-Semitism, social media manipulation, foreign influence campaigns, and the growing role digital platforms play in shaping society. Their research has informed congressional investigations, influenced public policy, and helped policymakers better understand one of the most consequential battlegrounds of our time. Joel Finkelstein, welcome to Nothing But the Truth.
Really a pleasure to be here, Trudy. Thank you for having me.
So happy to have you and to understand this very complex uh,
Mhm.
war that is being waged. So to begin with, tell us, Joel, what does NCRI stand for and why was it created?
Listen, it stands for the Network Contagion Research Institute, which sounds like a bad video game, but it's actually, a real organization. And I started this when I was studying neuroscience at Princeton. Growing up, I'd always been a puppeteer. So I was fascinated with how you can conduct, acts and sort of tell stories that kind of grab people's attention and how you can control their attention. I was really enamored by that. So I was studying the brain and I was using tools that literally you could use to puppeteer the brain. These were tools that we use laser beams to take control of neurons and puppeteer the brain. And I thought this was absolutely a spectacular new science, and we would learn so much studying this. In the midst of that, I started the Network Contagion Research Institute because people that I knew, who I respected and thought were very intelligent, began mouthing ideological utterances that I didn't recognize. There was a mob mentality setting in amongst people, and not just any people, but people I respected. And when I saw that happening, this is 2016, 2017, I knew that social media had something to do with this. And it felt a lot like what I was doing in neuroscience. We're using laser beams to puppeteer animals and understand how their brain works. People are using digital messages and they're fueling these narratives and it's puppeteering people's brains in very similar ways. So when I saw that happening, I thought to myself, look, we need to study this. And as much as I'd love to continue studying consciousness, it seems like this is going to foment something that's very dark. And so I bought some colleagues to work on this problem, and we began immediately setting out with a set of tools from neuroscience, from engineering, to better capture these trends and show how they're working before disaster strikes.
So you started in 2017.
That's right.
Okay, so from 2017 to 2023, before 10/7 and then post 10/7, did you notice a difference in what was happening online and in this information space?
Certainly an escalation. There's no doubt about that. I think that the way to think about this is that when we think about human beings and how we have always known each other, there is a set of credits that people strive for, a set of rewards they look for, a set of relationships they have. And those relationships and those rewards are based on how you act in the world, the professional accomplishments you achieve, things that really tie into who you are in a way that's known by other people, right? As the world became more horizontal, as social media began eroding the vertical kind of transmission of knowledge that we used to have, the way that our cultures, our homes, or the people we know in our neighborhood defined us, information started coming from everywhere. And in that kind of environment, high octane, sort of shrill and intense language it picks up signification. And now it's easy to gain attention. It used to be hard. You used to have to earn it. Now the wildest people could rise to the top. And so there's something about that medium that lends itself natively towards polarization, towards mob mentality. And that I think began certainly, at the onset of the internet and the communication age, but it really started reaching high levels of escalation and fomenting real world violence after Charlottesville, after the BLM instances. We could really see that this was something that was migrating into a domain that was escaping our ability to see it and really controlling the world in ways that were itself uncontrolled.
So, Joel, this was really great information that you gave us, and uh, I think it will help us all to navigate through these very difficult uh, information channels and understand that we have a lot of issues and how we can begin to address them. I think knowledge is really key. So, knowing that these information sources are problematic for all of us is very helpful. NCRI is doing something real, though. They are in the trenches. Your organization, your company is in the trenches doing some real work. So tell us about NCRI.
Well, we are a family of analysts, of neuroscientists, geographers, medical doctors. There are medical doctors on our staff. And of course, machine learning analysts and large language modelers and computer scientists. So a wide variety of people in a lab. And like any other lab in the world, across several universities, we have biweekly lab meetings. In these lab meetings, which are quite extensive, often virtual, but not always, you have people picking out ideas and problems and troubleshooting some of the hardest challenges the country's facing. In one lab meeting, we can go from talking about, I'm not kidding, the psychological theories of authoritarianism to the problems that unions are facing in terms of growing extremism in the education space, and everything in between. So as that's happening, we're troubleshooting the problems in a very chewy session where analysts with different specialties are picking at one another and picking at problems in order to collaborate and in a highly multidisciplinary way and work together on these thorny issues. It is a non-stop fountain of extraordinarily challenging and complex problems from an unbelievably wide array of different domains. And so I've always thought to myself, if anybody wanted to make a great reality TV show about nerds solving problems, that would be our lab meeting.
Okay, that sounds entertaining, but so once you're sitting in the lab meetings with these panel of experts, do you discuss what you feel are the most important challenges, or do you feel what are the challenges that you could actually tackle?
It's often a mix of both, and we try to bridge the distance. We try to go beyond what we think we can do with the confidence that we can do something about it. And so I can give you a taste just in the past month. We have worked with, and let me give you a kind of sample both of how our work process works and the different methods we use. And then I'll take you through kind of how that translates into what the real world does with our research, right? So your listeners are probably familiar with what's been happening with Texas and Florida. Well, we've been in the measures that have been passed by these states to better manage issues of terror penetrating into the states through the 501(c)(3) system, through not-for-profits, through CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations. Our work, in the lab meeting, we started surfacing information that that senior terror officials were simultaneously acting as directors of major not-for-profits in Tampa. At the same time, they were the Secretary General of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a major terrorist organization. They're co-currently directing not-for-profit in Tampa. You could be one of those things, but you probably shouldn't be both of them at the same time. Okay, so we noted that terror financiers were working to create these organizations, and we worked with the lieutenant governor and the attorney general to create a broad-based perspective on the state as it's mounting new legislation to manage the problems that the federal government can't see and can't manage that well. But our ability to image them can then be paired to the capability of executive orders and also congressional jurisdictions and legislation that allows the state to take measures based on our data. The data that we surfaced with came out in an op-ed with the lieutenant governor in the City Journal describing why these are problems. It was used in oh, what are they called? The when you support a case legally in the Supreme Court, you bring an amicus brief. The data was used in numerous amicus briefs to support executive actions, right? And so the data is used to defend these actions. It's also used to inform them. And you can see how it goes from investigation to working to state executives and legislatures, and in some cases to members of Congress themselves. So we become kind of you can think of it almost like as a prosthetic arm, a prosthetic leg that they're facts that these folks need to help them see the problems they're managing, pass legislation to deal with it, and then use the legislation that they passed to better manage it. At every point in that problem, we are surfacing information and helping to create pathways. They're not asking us for it. That's very important. We're not agents of the government, right? But we are bringing that attention to people who can do something about it. Now, let me show you an example where that becomes even more concrete. Just this last week in Florida, we revealed that there's a fund called the Benjamin Fund, this lady, Medea Benjamin, who is a director of Code Pink, one of the organizations we mentioned earlier in our conversation that works with this foul Chinese Singham network to infiltrate America. She turns out she's running her business out of Miami. Not smart because she's not registered to do that. She's also not registered to fundraise there. That didn't stop her, apparently, from raising hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to Cuba without any oversight by the state and to work with terrorists in Cuba to organize the trips that she was bringing there, presumably for humanitarian aid, demonstrably for political action. Okay, so doing that is highly suspect. And I'm not a lawyer, but a lot of the law enforcement officials that I just spoke to in Florida sure seem to think that's illegal. And they're passing a set of laws that we helped to inform to create capabilities for the state to manage those problems, even as we're surfacing that information both to them and directly, in many cases, to Bessent and Treasury. Treasury got this information last week, and by the beginning of the following week, it turns out that Fox News reported they had issued subpoenas to Medea Benjamin, to Hassan Piker, the left-wing extreme radical influencer, who accompanied them on their trip to Cuba. And that was shortly after Bessent and members of Treasury received our information that these organizations were acting illegally, potentially working with Hamas, working with the IRGC. Direct evidence in many cases of collaboration with terror organizations, right? These things have been sitting beneath the ground for some time. And in a room with a bunch of nerds, every Monday and every Thursday, we bang our heads against them to figure out how they're constructed. This involves looking online through open resources, databases, looking at tax filings to understand where money's coming from, where's it going to, what's registered, what isn't registered, looking at online information, measuring the noise, the volume and the velocity of specific hateful ideas and narratives, tracking those back through not just corporate filings, but also through networks of social graphs of organizational relationships, right? And tracing that in some cases using the methods of social psychology and large language modeling to understand where these problems are coming from and why people are so complacent in not dealing with them. Okay, so a week in NCRI spans every topic you can imagine. It works with lawmakers from Congress, where we've briefed them several times, leading to breaking investigations, referrals to the IRS, calls for the Department of Justice, and it mixes it up to allow us a space to be able to imagine beyond what we know to solve problems we never thought we could, with people who are completely committed to this and enraptured by a mission that I think they feel very motivated by.
So do you get phone calls from people wanting to report things that they feel you should investigate? Does it work that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I said this at the beginning of the conversation. Really, we should edit this out. There are two ways this happens. One is that we're arguing about the hard problems that we think no one can, that we think people aren't solving, and that people are throwing their hands up saying, "Oh, we can't solve this." And we love those problems because that gives our brains a lot of work to do in terms of, well, maybe we can, and how would that, what would that look like? But the other way that we get the virus detection is when experts come to us, or organizations come to us that don't have this technical capability, but they know there's a problem there. They're connected to the people who are concerned about it. If somebody could just help them create a floodlight over this problem and really explain how it works, boy, would that help them. And we get a lot of those people coming to us. Sometimes we get leads in intelligence, but mostly we get problems, and the problems are the leads.
So have you investigated or looked into the Tucker Carlson issue?
It's definitely on our radar. We've done similar work, and we are doing that. We are doing investigations into Tucker and Crew. But we did work, for instance, on Fuentes, and we had a piece we produced on him called "America Last." And in this piece, what we showed was that his entire trajectory to fame was highly engineered through bot networks and inauthentic amplification, gaming the algorithm to create false prestige inflation. More than close to 50% of the amplification of his earlier viral tweets, we found that those came from foreign sources, in large part from places like Nigeria, Pakistan, India. That's called engagement farming, guys. That's completely inauthentic. And what's really upsetting is that, especially after the death of Charlie Kirk, people really went in for it. The false prestige was not questioned by the media. It wasn't questioned by people. It was provocative because it made people feel like if he's so popular, well, that must say something about us. This really is a problem. I should pay attention. Maybe we really are Nazis, right? That's the duping. That's what a cognitive operation looks like. The false prestige creates a crisis because it puts into question who we are. And the urgency of resolving that question gives a guy like that so much power, right? So we revealed how that happened and how his rise to fame was essentially coordinated by inauthentic networks that violated Twitter's terms of service and foreign amplifications that have the geographic signature of engagement farming, right? And that doesn't seem particularly American to me, Trudy. Right. So I think we need to have clarity, and we sent that information to Twitter's trust and safety team. We sent it to members of Congress who deal with foreign manipulation. And we don't always, we can't always get these guys in the sense that, like, oh well, now, and I wouldn't necessarily want this. Now the person's going to get deplatformed. We're not big believers in that, but we do believe that people have the right to know when they're being deceived. They absolutely have the right to know that.
Well, that is incredible. And what NCRI does is absolutely critical to this equation and incredible. Can you give us one other example of uh, one of the projects that NCRI had been working on?
There's so many. So I'll tell you, just in the past month, in the past quarter, we've done a lot of work on Iranian operations. Man, we've really done a lot of work to unseat, to show people how diligent the IRGC is in its information warfare in the United States. We've looked at the Democratic Socialists of America and the trips that they've taken, and their narrative convergence with hostile foreign states when they go to Nicaragua, when they go to Venezuela, when they go to Cuba, when they meet with world leaders, when they go to China, we found out. And the way that they're staying in luxury hotels, right? So and we've looked at, as I mentioned, we looked at unions. We found that unions and teachers unions are sharing resources in ways that are creating conflicts of interest that are completely undisclosed. Millions of dollars that are falsely labeled, falsely reported as support for teachers in these unions is actually going directly to political spending in ways that is unmonitored and appears to us, we assess, to potentially be illegal. Okay, and this is happening with millions of dollars at a massive scale. We see a lot. We see membership of rotating seats of union leadership, creating new organizations that unions then transfer new funds to, with conflicts completely undisclosed. And we note that, like, that in the analysis, that wages for teachers and unions hasn't actually gone up since 1970. They haven't actually, when you make the adjustments, they haven't actually effectively done the one thing they're supposed to do. So we can literally take an X-ray and show these are political machines. They appear to be operating illegally in ways that we have long suspected. Here's the data to show that. Now we're talking to the Department of Education, right? That was 2 weeks ago, right? So
Wow.
so I think that that's a good example of, like, how do we cut, like, show us the sacred cows. It's time to have a barbecue. Show us the Gordian knots. It's time to get our axes out, right? I really think that like this lack of agency, the lack of determination and agency and belief that there are things that we can do about it. It's not the evil people that are the enemy, Trudy. It really is the good people who've decided there's nothing we could do about it. That's really the problem. Because I expect the evil people who are helpless to do exactly what they're doing. That's what God put them here for, right? But when we say there's nothing we can do about it, what I'm telling you is that I really believe that that's the problem. I genuinely believe that the biggest problem we face is that, not the evil people. There will always be evil people.
That's incredible. What a great perspective. Before we leave, could you just repeat to my listeners the story that you told me before we went on air about the person sitting next to you on the plane yesterday?
Oh, what a great way, what a great story. I mean, after our conversation, I'm flying home from Orlando having brief law enforcement.
On what? What were you briefing them on?
On Medea Benjamin and all the things that are about to, explode in terms of
Okay.
Cuba and the terrorists and Hamas and all the rest of it, right? So my brain is fried, and like, I literally had woken up at 3 in the morning to get to Orlando the night before. I'm on a 9 o'clock flight coming home, and I sit next to this guy, and you know what? He just seems like he's an awake, aware dude. He just seems like he's somebody who really cares about his family, knows what's going on, incredibly well informed. I'm shocked. I speak to world leaders, I speak to members of Congress. This guy's smart than all of them. He's really, really smart and really pays attention. So we get involved in conversation, and we're talking about our family. He starts telling me about his daughter. And I'm engaged and humanizing with this guy, and I find myself shockingly awake, having had the day I've had, and because I'm so motivated by this person's humanity. So he's telling his daughter. His daughter's a 3-year-old girl. They send her to this new school called the Wellspring School, and she comes home. He says, and he's something's wrong. He can tell something's wrong. So the first cue, someone's home, someone's paying attention. So what's wrong with his daughter? She's not learning anything. I said, well, what do you mean she's not learning anything? What do you mean by that? She says, well, she comes home and asks her what she's done at school every single day. Nothing. Well, can you tell me what your day was like? We did sensory play. What is sensory play? You put your hand in a box of sand and you feel what things are like. That's sensory play. Okay, so and they're learning some pretty weird things, right? And it's obvious they're not learning anything useful at all. So at some point, he goes to speak to the people in the school. He pulls his child out and says, "This is ridiculous. I'm in an elite community of people who are all sending their kids here, right?" And he looks into who owns the school. Turns out that the organization that is the largest investor for in this school and hundreds of others, thousands of others across the nation. They exist in California, they exist in Florida, thousands of schools, tens, hundreds of thousands of students, right? Is Primavera Capital. Primavera Capital was the lead investor. It's a Chinese a company, and it was the lead investor in ByteDance
Wow.
that actually
Wow.
created the TikTok epidemic that was also set to rot the brains of American youth. We're going to look back on this, Trudy, and we're going to ask ourselves, not why would they do this? I think they're telling us exactly who they are. The question isn't why they're doing this. We know why they're doing this. The question is, what are we going to do about it? That's the question. And if you can have a conversation on a plane, I'm telling you right now, that conversation will end up provoking a national security problem. Okay, I'm gonna talk to the National Security Council. I'm gonna write a piece on this, right? Because somebody decided they would care about their kid. That's why that happened, right? We've got to cut the BS. This is less complicated than we think it is.
Wow.
That's what's come out of our work. Okay. The lie we keep telling ourselves, this is all too complicated for anybody to understand. It is hard. Okay. It is hard to understand this stuff, but that's all it is. That's all it is. And it's worth
Wow.
the effort to do it. It's worth the effort to do it. And then once you do, it turns out you can beat it.
So I guess the takeaway from all of this is not just that NCRI is doing tremendous work in what you call your laboratory, and then taking that work to the people who matter with regards to that, but it's to each and every one of us and to my listeners to be able to say, I'm going to be an active member of my life from now on.
Yeah. And all we're doing is trying to show everyone that that works. It really, really works. That's all we're doing.
Wow. Well, you at NCRI are doing a tremendous amount, really. Thank you so much for everything that you do, Joel, and for being such an active participant in life and for helping us navigate these very tough times. Really, really appreciate the work that you do and the work that NCRI does.
Once we all commit to waking up, I think you'd be surprised how less tough the times get. That starts the moment you make that decision. That was great.
I do love the optimism. I do think that, at a moment when we are so desperate for some optimism, to hear it from you, who's actually in the trenches and sees the worst of the worst.
Yeah. Oh, and listen, I haven't even told you how bad it is. I mean, the stuff that I see, you would lose sleep if you saw the things that I've seen. The child pornography, the Nazi stuff in the dark web, the way the Russians are corrupting our children in the darkest places you can imagine. It's more dark than anything you could ever imagine what I've seen. Okay, so I basically think that our unwillingness to see it is completely commensurate with our hopelessness. Those are the exact same things at the limit. Because what we're really worried about is that our sense of like we won't be up to the task to have meaning in the face of what we're fighting. We won't really be up to the task. That is such a stupid idea. It's not true, right? We have to get rid of that.
Well, I do think that there is strength in the numbers against us. It seems
Yeah,
like
but
there are.
they're non-player characters. There's nothing to them. There's really nothing to them. Okay, so I'm not saying they're not smart. They're brilliant people, but they're also really predictable, right? What they're doing is really predictable. Who they are is really predictable, right? They don't have the flexibility. They don't have that because they've checked their brains at the door, right? In service to themselves, right? In their cynicism. Because of that, they don't have the grasp to be as depth and agile as the people who actually care, right? And that will always win. It will always win. I can tell you that like technically from a scientific standpoint, I can show you why that's true. The network of trust always overcomes the mindless mob as a rule.
Great news. Great to hear from such a great, smart guy who is running one of the deepest information exposure sources. Um, it's good to hear that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Really. Can't
Thank
thank you
you.
enough for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Trudy. So the origins of the NCRI are, kind of it's been written about. I think Princeton University had a piece about this. I met my partner Adam Sohn on a plane. He saw me looking up a bunch of perverse memes and network graphs, and it turns out he literally thought I might be a terrorist because he saw this stuff I was looking at on my computer. He's like, this is really wild, Joel. Like who are you? And so it took me a few minutes to realize that he was actually interrogating me to see if I was a threat. And once I realized what was happening, I quelled his suspicions. I explained sort of, this is who I am, this is what I do. He's like, well, that's really amazing. At the time, he was working for Charles Koch as his head of communications. He previously worked for Jeb Bush, doing communications for the Bush administration in Florida. So he was a seasoned communicator and had been working with the Koch Foundation, the now things called Stand Together, and said, Joel, listen, I can get you some resources here. I think what you're doing is remarkable and wholly important, and he became my co-founder. So Adam Sohn is his name, and he and I became co-founders. And as I was working in Princeton University, I was introduced to a fellow named General John Allen. Now, General John Allen is a four-star Marine general who led NATO's forces against ISIS. He's appointed by Obama. And he had come to talk about artificial intelligence, which is a favorite topic of his, and also white supremacy, which was a favorite topic of ours. And I was working at the time with Robbie George, who is a well-known professor of constitutional law at Princeton University. And Robbie didn't have a lot of people who knew much about AI in his program. So he said, Joel, why don't you go sit next to the general at this dinner? They sat me right next to him. We began talking. When I showed him what I was doing, he said, "You're kidding." He said, "You're kidding." I'm trying to channel my best General Allen voice. "You're kidding, young man. We should bring you to Brookings. I'd like to set up a meeting with my staff to immediately introduce you to some people." So I go to the Brookings Institution, which he directs, and there I'm introduced to a fellow named John Farmer. John Farmer is the former Attorney General of the state of New Jersey, and he was the chief counsel to the 9/11 Commission. He ran an organization at the Miller Institute for Secure Communities at Rutgers University. And there he said, Joel, why don't we start a training program And Adam and myself began a training program at Rutgers University, the first in the country that I know of, for social cyber threat detection. And he said the next 9/11 is coming from social media. That's what he said. He said that before October 7th. He said it before, and literally, I think it's in one of our first reports. That was the introduction of one of our first reports. The next 9/11 is coming from social media. Right. So we began this program at Rutgers University training youth, and it solved a really crucial problem, which was at the time nobody really knew how to think about this stuff, so we had to invent a lot. And there's nothing for inventing like teaching. There's nothing like not knowing what the heck you're talking about to a bunch of students until you do. And that really helped us find. And I found some of the most important people in my organization were in that first cohort of students at Rutgers University. I have somebody who's now on my board who I taught in that first cohort, and she became somebody who became a forward engineer at Palantir, right? And came back to us because she's like, "Oh, this mission's really amazing." And she's literally gone and Priscilla, she's such a star. She's literally has gone to Great Britain to help inform them how to manage cyber riots and address parliamentary hearings on this question. She's now considered a world expert on this and does
Wow.
tools. So, these are people that I trained. These are people that I trained. These are my kids. And now they're outdoing me and they're in the organization. So it's taken 7 or 8 years. It takes a long time to build up that kind of trust, that reservoir of talent. And we can't really work with people that come from elsewhere. It's very hard because they're not really trained to think like we think. And the best traders in Wall Street know that. You got to really train your own. So John Farmer really gave us a great opportunity, and General Allen has been, an instrumental advisor, and that really I think helped us very early on to sort of be not seen as so much of the wunderkind and in the security community, but people that were actually attested for by senior members in both law enforcement, military, and intelligence.
Wow. What a group. What an amazing uh, resource of talent. And thank you so much for your perspective. Thank you for what you're doing in the trenches of this unbelievable war. And for helping us better understand this increasingly important front in the battle for truth. To our listeners, thank you for joining us. This has been Nothing But the Truth with Trudy Stern and our very special guest, Joel Finkelstein. You can catch us every Thursday at 9:30 p.m. on the radio. And if you missed any part of this show or want to listen to any of our past episodes, you can find Nothing But the Truth wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and keep seeking nothing but the truth.